It's Ranging Essays 2, the sequel. Did you do better? Hiya. Last time we did the ranging essays, I told you that if you weren't on the same page as me, to spend some real time and attention thinking about why that is and do your best to adjust your standards. Hopefully you've done that. Let's see how well you've done that, though. Before we talk about the ranging essays proper, let's talk about the grading standards one more time. The more you can internalize this, the sooner you can, the better off you'll be. Now, an A paper, superior, sophisticated, impressive, goes above and beyond the call of duty, the kind of paper you want to take home to meet your folks. B, effective, appropriate, convincing. It's there. It does everything what it needs to do. C, inadequate, inconsistencies, lapses. Things go wrong. D, disappointing, less success, weak. Lots of things go wrong. F, unsatisfactory, simplistic, limited. Ugh. Now, knowing you have to go above and beyond the call of duty is one thing, but knowing what that actually means. What does it mean to go above and beyond the call of duty? Impressive in what? This is a wonderfully spelled paper. It's not really going to be what we're talking about. So when we go through this, again, I want you to compare and contrast what's going on in my interpretation as to what's going on in yours. But I want you to really focus on those specific qualities that I'm trying to favor in mine, because that's what you need to be doing too. So, my take on these, and keep in mind these are all a little bit closer together than the last group of papers. There's less room between them, so it's not quite as obvious. Cyril Figgis, number 1, Drinking and Romance. The bar imagery in both the intro and the conclusion make this paper immediately engaging. The argument seems well researched. The language could be more direct in drawing distinctions between the novel and the analysis. The essay does not connect the analysis directly to the research/scholarship on gender roles as much as it could. So, let's look at the intro. Sitting at a smoky bar, I look all around at the people gathered. I sit by myself, content to be alone. An unknown man with a charming accent comes up to me and asks me to buy me a drink. And then we get into explaining that, and then we move into the general idea of romance fiction, and then we move into the specific story. The setting, how this author set the introduction in the bar, which was also a setting in the story, is good here because it allows us to picture not only the scene they're describing, but the scene the novel is describing, even if we haven't read the novel itself. And it comes back to it, and that's good. As far as thesis statement, we talked a lot about how important thesis statements were last time. As far as the thesis statement goes, this one has one that fits all of the requirements. It has a specific subject of analysis, the novel. It makes a precise claim. It spells out some of the important reasons there. Yeah, the language is a bit clunky, but it does everything it needs to do in terms of content. Now, let's check out a paragraph to see how well this stuff works out in detail. The perception that people have to fit certain physical characteristics to be worthy of affection by the opposite sex can be seen in romance fiction. It's wordy, it's a bit clunky, and there's a passive verb. And they bring in the novel in the next sentence. It really should be at the beginning, because if I'm looking at this as a topic sentence, it makes me think the subject is romance fiction in general, or this perception. Ground it in the specific subject. But then we have a specific quote. Well, not quote, but we have a specific paraphrase of what's going on in the story. Then we bring an outside source. Then it explains the outside source. And then it tends to wrap everything together. And this is what this paper does all the way throughout. That's good. That's a structure that allows us to grasp onto the argument. You could center it a lot more in the topic sentences in each of the paragraphs, but it's clear and it's in here. Number 2, Barry Dillon, British Punks. My initial take was this is a well-constructed and fairly clear essay. It does, however, suffer from a very important flaw in that it doesn't really rise above description. Based on the evidence, it seems obvious that the American punks in the film didn't like the British punks. If it's obvious, it's not really a matter of debate. Moreover, what's the significance? Why should the reader care about how the punks felt about each other? So, how does that work in the essay? Intro. As an introduction, it sets a little bit of the historical issues at the beginning, and we just need to hook the reader in some way. If we can picture the historical issues, that might be a way in. It might be another way in to describe something that's happening in the movie. It might be another way to just give a good statistic or something. But this person decides to go historical and decides to set it up with a quote that describes the historical. That's fine. Does it introduce the subject of analysis? Well, the subject of analysis of this paper is what happens in SLC Punk, the movie. And that only gets mentioned in the thesis, which is a bit problematic. Let's talk about that thesis. Although British punks are famous for being violent anarchists, the fictional story SLC Punk shows how some punks living in the United States found their antics to be watered down and soft. Is the subject of analysis here how the British punks were? How it was in this movie? It's not precisely clear. And there isn't a blueprint of reasons here either. So the thesis is on a little bit tricky ground. When I read this paper, it's like, okay, there are two groups of punks that don't care for each other. So what? Why should I care about that? And that was a big question which made this paper a lot less impactful than it could have been. Finally, the last and most important quote of the scene comes from Steve-O again. So here's this band, ECP, Extreme Corporal Punishment, one of the toughest, most hardcore bands in the UK. Good band as well. They come to Salt Lake City. They think it's too tough for them. An 18-year-old punk beat the shit out of their bouncer. With this, Steve-O clearly states the British punks are soft and the American punks are much more hardcore. With the help of the other characters throughout the movie, they successfully convey one depiction of the British punk from the outside. Why should I care that the movie does this? How is it important? How does it tie to a larger debate? If it's so obvious, why are you wasting my time telling me this? This is where the argument in this paper falls down, because it's ultimately an argument that doesn't give you a reason to care about it. It doesn't let you know why it's important. If the paper doesn't think it's important, why should I? The next essay, number 3, would be Lana Kane's Participate in the Moment. The paper wants to make a good argument about how video games are more effective than our films. The problem is that mechanically it is all over the map, and that makes it hard to follow. The sources are not incorporated. Rather, the essay moves into a I read this, then I read this section. The thesis brings up claims of education which were not pursued in the essay proper. So let's look at that introduction. It does bring up Lara Croft Tomb Raider and the video game and the movie. I'm not really sure if it hooks us at all, but it brings up the subject. We have the thesis statement, the video game Lara Croft Tomb Raider is much more effective when it comes to inspiring a wide range of emotions, maintaining those emotions, and educating the player than, the movie Lara Croft Tomb Raider, since it interacts with the player. So there's a specific subject of analysis, the comparison between the movie and the video game. There is a claim. The blueprint of reasons is a bit weak here because it only says one thing, because it interacts with the player. And I get it. How is a video game different than a movie? Which one of those is most interactive, and how does it affect how we view the text? It can be an interesting subject. Does this paper really answer that, though? Nah, not really. Let's look at a specific paragraph here. In the emotional and psychological effects of action and romance scenes on men and women by Kayla Mager and Hanover College, where one of the studies was done was about how men and women respond to action movies and romance movies. You notice that as a topic sentence doesn't mention the subject of analysis, the difference between this specific movie and this specific video game? Doesn't mention video games at all. Then it gives us the response. The results were both that men and women responded the same to each type of movie. They responded one way to the action movie and another to romance movies. Both the men's and women's responses to the action movies were high heart rates. There's spelling issues that pop up here, and that's just one of the things we got to deal with. Then, in the last sentence, we get the movie Lara Croft Tomb Raider is an action movie. It's like, okay, so we remember what the subject is now. And that's a problem with this paper. They did a lot of research, but they didn't incorporate the research as evidence to support their claim about their subjective analysis. And the explicit parts of the argument are going to be the thesis statement and the topic sentences. The thesis statement sets up what the whole essay is about, and the topic sentences break down what this paragraph is doing in support of the thesis statement. So if the topic sentences don't mention your subject, it means that you're guiding your reader to just kind of wander all over the place, and it makes it look like you don't really have a firm picture of where your paper is going either. I will bet you anything that the person who wrote this paper didn't outline it at all. It's kind of obvious. And finally, we have the Cheryl paper, Donnie Darko and Nerds. The mechanics and language of this paper have serious issues to the point of making the text hard to follow, including a comma splice in the thesis statement. And if you can't give your thesis statement a proofread to make sure it's a complete sentence without sentence structure issues, there's bigger issues, isn't there? The research is not at an academic level, as it is largely consists of a general audience level research. The argument is vague and needs greater specificity, particularly in the thesis statement and topic sentences, which we just said were the most important parts of, because that's where you clearly state where your argument is. To be a nerd does not mean a person has to be old school nerd or look like how people stereotype nerds to be. Donnie Darko manages to prove the stereotype wrong in many different ways. This paper is somewhat interested in Donnie Darko, but its main point of interest is nerds in general. There are so many different types of nerds. Normally, people classify nerds as old school nerds, but in all reality, there are so many more, such as music nerds, video game nerds, comic book nerds, scientific nerds, or computer nerds, and many more. Don't use exclamation points in formal writing. Now, does any of this sound like something that a scholar would write? No. It sounds a lot more like a dumpster fire, if you want to be clear. Now, getting our standards to line up means, knowing what makes an A paper and a B paper, but it also means pulling the most important lessons when we go over sample writing, so we know the things that are going to help our judgment. I think, and it's an academic point of view, is that argument is the most important thing. It's what you're writing your paper for. You're trying to get a specific point of view across. You're trying to argue that your specific point of view is right. Argument is everything. I have had people in the past tell me this is a great paper, but there's problems with the argument. And I was like, well, it's not a great paper if there's problems with the argument, because the argument is the most important thing. I would say it's everything. It's where I start with papers. So focus on the argument. And having an argument means clearly thinking about how your argument is laid out, how points fit together. And in an academic paper, this should be very clear because there are explicit points: thesis statement, topic sentences. I should be able to read just your thesis statement and topic sentences and get your argument. Everything else is there to support it. When the argument is clear, everything works. When the argument is not clear, it's not pretty, is it? Argument really is everything when it comes to academic writing. You're writing to get a point across. So making sure you're clear and explicit with that argument, thesis statement, topic sentences, is really the most important thing you can do. It's something that you're going to hear me talk about over and over again. And hopefully You're a lot closer this time than you were last time. Keep working on getting your standards adjusted, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye now.